The court expected the rejected Omega to cry, but instead she smiled. Nobody in the royal court of Ashford Kingdom noticed Evelyn Carter at first. Not really. She had been standing near the far side of the marble hall for nearly 20 minutes, hands folded quietly in front of her pale blue dress while noblewomen drifted through conversations that somehow always lowered in volume when she passed. Some pretended kindness. Others did not bother pretending at all. The grand court stretched endlessly beneath vaulted ceilings painted with old victories and older kings, candlelight reflecting softly against polished stone floors while enormous windows overlooked snow-covered mountains fading into evening fog. Beautiful place. Cold place. Everything in Ashford Castle looked expensive enough to belong to people who had never worried about humiliation. Evelyn shifted her weight quietly, fingers tightening against soft fabric beneath her sleeves. Trembling looked too much like weakness. She had learned that young. Especially as an Omega. Especially as an Omega no one considered remarkable. Not ugly. Not beautiful either. Just forgettable. At least according to most people. Her hair rested in soft chestnut waves against her shoulders, simple compared to the jeweled perfection surrounding her tonight. A few strands had slipped loose during the carriage ride up the mountain, though nobody besides her seemed likely to notice. Noblewomen nearby wore gowns worth more than her childhood home, silver-threaded fabric sparkling beneath chandeliers while quiet laughter floated carelessly through the room. Evelyn heard pieces of conversations as she stood there. "Do you think tonight is finally the announcement?" The king delayed long enough. "She is sweet, I suppose." Pause. Soft laughter. "Sweet is not queen material." Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the marble floor again. Same feeling. Different room. Different people. Always the same story. Somewhere inside herself, hope shifted nervously. Dangerous thing, hope. Dangerous because tonight mattered. For months, whispers around the kingdom suggested King Lucian Ashford would finally announce his chosen mate during tonight's royal gathering. Advisors had been pushing him toward stability. The kingdom wanted a queen. The court wanted certainty. And somehow, impossibly, Evelyn had ended up near the center of speculation. Not because she was extraordinary. Mostly because Lucian had spent the past year quietly seeking her company. Conversations in gardens after council meetings. Small kindnesses nobody else noticed. Once, during winter, he had draped his coat over her shoulders after she forgot gloves during snowfall. Another time, he remembered she preferred jasmine tea without her ever telling him twice. Tiny things. Quiet things. Dangerous things if someone like Evelyn started mistaking kindness for affection. Her best friend had warned her weeks ago. "Kings do not belong to people like us," Amelia whispered one evening while helping pin Evelyn's hair before another royal dinner. "Do not let kindness trick you." Evelyn wanted to believe Lucian was different. Wanted to believe the way his silver eyes softened slightly around her meant something. Wanted to believe the late-night conversations mattered. Foolish maybe. But hope rarely asked permission before arriving. The sound of trumpets interrupted the room suddenly. Conversations quieted instantly. The enormous doors near the throne opened wide. King Lucian Ashford entered beneath gold candlelight. The room straightened around him instinctively. Power had a way of changing oxygen. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark formal clothing tailored perfectly against sharp lines that somehow made him look carved from winter itself. Silver eyes calm. Controlled. Distant in the way powerful men often became when responsibilities weighed heavier than feelings. Evelyn hated how her heart still stumbled every time she looked at him. Ridiculous. 24 years old and still nervous over one man glancing her direction. Lucian greeted council members with practiced efficiency before eventually crossing toward the center of the court. Advisors followed close behind, expressions too formal somehow. Something shifted uneasily inside Evelyn's chest. This felt rehearsed. Important. The king raised one hand slowly. Silence settled instantly across the hall. "Thank you for gathering tonight," Lucian began evenly, voice smooth enough to quiet even the loudest room. "There has been considerable discussion regarding the future of this kingdom." Noblewomen exchanged excited looks immediately. The room leaned forward. Hope fluttered painfully inside Evelyn before she could stop it. Lucian's silver gaze moved briefly through the crowd. And stopped. On her. Just for a second. Long enough to make breathing feel inconvenient. Then he looked away. Strange. Cold almost. As king, he continued calmly, it is my responsibility to make decisions for the stability of Ashford. Something tightened painfully inside Evelyn's chest. Wrong. Suddenly this felt wrong. Too formal. Too distant. Lucian exhaled once before saying words quiet enough to shatter something anyway. I have decided, he said evenly, that I cannot proceed with the proposed bond. Silence arrived first. Complete silence. Then confusion spread through the court like spilled wine. Proposed bond. No names spoken. None needed. Hundreds of eyes moved toward Evelyn all at once. For one terrible second nobody moved. The silence hanging across the royal court felt unreal somehow, too heavy to belong to ordinary disappointment. Then came the whispers. Quiet at first. Careful. Like people testing whether cruelty would be allowed tonight. Oh no. Did he just reject her? In front of everyone? Evelyn Carter stood perfectly still near the center of the marble hall, while humiliation arrived exactly where everyone expected it to. Warm against her chest. Cold beneath her skin. Familiar somehow. Different room. Same feeling. Hundreds of eyes pressed against her all at once. Noblewomen lowered jeweled fans just enough to whisper behind them. Council members shifted awkwardly without actually looking uncomfortable enough to intervene. Nobody looked at King Lucian Ashford. Only her. Always easier to stare at the person being left behind. Evelyn folded trembling hands tighter together beneath the sleeves of her pale blue dress. Trembling looked too much like weakness. Somewhere inside herself, something cracked quietly. Not dramatically. Just enough to hurt. Lucian stood near the center of the court, silver eyes unreadable beneath towering chandeliers while advisors remained close beside him. Calm. Controlled. Untouched by embarrassment. That hurt too. Maybe most of all. Because a small, foolish part of Evelyn had expected him to at least look sorry. Instead, he looked like a king performing duty. Like none of this had ever been personal. Strange. After a year of late-night conversations in Castle Gardens. After warm tea left outside her room when she worked too late helping organize relief programs for smaller villages. After quiet smiles no one else ever noticed. She had mistaken kindness for closeness. Amelia had warned her. Kings do not belong to people like us. A soft laugh nearby snapped Evelyn back into the room. Lady Seraphina Vale stood near the front row of noble guests wearing a silver gown so expensive it practically shimmered beneath candlelight. Beautiful in the practice kind of way people trusted immediately. Sharp smile. Sharper eyes. Well, Seraphina said softly enough to sound polite and loudly enough for nearby nobles to hear. I suppose hope can be dangerous. Quiet laughter followed. Not loud. Worse than loud. Polite laughter. Refined laughter. The kind rich people used when they wanted cruelty to sound sophisticated. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the polished floor briefly. Breathe. Just breathe. She hated moments like this. Moments when rooms became stages and heartbreak turned into entertainment. Across the hall, servants suddenly looked very busy pretending not to listen. Even they knew what was happening. Everybody knew. Nobody interrupted humiliation once it became public enough. Lucian finally moved again. The kingdom requires stability, he said evenly, voice smooth enough to sound reasonable. And difficult decisions are necessary for its future. Future. Stability. Political words. Safe words. Cold words. Evelyn almost laughed at how carefully he avoided saying her name. Not Evelyn. Not someone he once spent hours speaking with beside fireplaces after midnight. Just a difficult decision. Strange how quickly people turn human feelings into strategy when power entered the room. Before we continue, if stories like this pull you in, make sure to like the video and subscribe, so you do not miss what happens next because Evelyn is about to say something nobody in that court will ever forget. The whispers around the room grew louder now. Less careful. Poor thing. She actually believed it. Honestly, what did she expect? Evelyn felt heat climb painfully toward her face. Same old story. Not enough. Never enough. Too ordinary. Too soft. Too forgettable. A queen should be beautiful, powerful, unforgettable. Evelyn had spent most of her life feeling like someone accidentally left unfinished. Pretty enough to avoid pity. Ordinary enough to never inspire certainty. She remembered being 16 and overhearing relatives describe her at a family gathering. "Sweet girl," someone said kindly. Then came the sentence she never forgot. "Just not the kind anyone chooses first." Funny how memory stayed loyal to the things that hurt. Serafina stepped forward slightly now, smile still polished. "Your Majesty," she said lightly toward Lucien, "surely the kingdom understands sacrifice. Difficult choices are admirable." Her gaze shifted deliberately toward Evelyn. "Some people simply are not meant for certain roles." More quiet laughter. Evelyn noticed something strange then. Lucien said nothing. Not agreement exactly, but not protection either. Silence. Dangerous thing, silence. Because silence often stood beside cruelty pretending innocence. Something inside Evelyn settled unexpectedly. Not healed. Not stronger exactly. Just still. Like heartbreak had finally become too tired to keep shaking. She lifted her chin slowly for the first time since the rejection. Around her, noble women leaned slightly forward. Waiting. Everyone expected tears now. Or pleading. Or embarrassment large enough to entertain dinner conversations for weeks. Even Lucien looked toward her again finally, silver eyes quieter somehow. Waiting too. Strange. He looked almost uncertain now. Like maybe he expected something emotional. Something easy. But Evelyn only folded trembling hands together tighter so nobody mistook heartbreak for weakness. Then she smiled. Small smile. Soft smile. Calm enough to unsettle the room completely. The smile unsettled the room more than tears ever could have. Nobody knew what to do with dignity when they had already prepared themselves for humiliation. Silence spread slowly across the royal court, swallowing whispers one uncomfortable second at a time. Evelyn Carter stood near the center of the marble hall with hands folded calmly in front of her pale blue dress, soft candlelight catching faint gold in her chestnut hair while hundreds of people waited for something dramatic to happen. Crying. Begging. Anger. Anything easier to understand than composure. Even Lady Serafina Vale looked briefly uncertain now, polished smile faltering around the edges. Cruelty worked best when people broke visibly. Evelyn had not broken. Not publicly anyway. Inside was another story. Inside felt sharp. Quietly devastating. Like watching an entire future disappear without enough warning to brace yourself properly. Still hurt though. Of course it hurt. A year of quiet hope did not disappear politely. Memories arrived uninvited now. Lucien staying late after council meetings just to ask whether she had eaten dinner. The night he stood beside her during the kingdom's winter festival, because she hated crowded events. The way his voice softened unexpectedly whenever he said her name. Evelyn. Like it mattered somehow. Foolish thing, memory. Always collecting evidence for dreams that never belonged to reality. Across the room, King Lucien Ashford remained perfectly composed near the center of the court, silver eyes fixed on Evelyn now with an expression she could not fully understand. Calm still. But something else had slipped beneath the surface. Unease maybe. He had expected heartbreak. Everyone had. Nobody expected calm. One council member shifted awkwardly beside the throne platform. Another lowered his gaze toward the floor entirely. The discomfort spreading through the room finally made humiliation less lonely somehow. Good, a small part of Evelyn thought quietly. Let them feel awkward. Lady Serafina recovered first, of course. People like her always did. Beautiful people learned early how to survive embarrassment by redirecting attention toward somebody weaker. She stepped forward with practiced elegance, silver gown shimmering beneath candlelight while a sympathetic expression settled onto her face just convincingly enough to sound crueler. Evelyn, she said gently, voice sweet enough to make poison sound polite. I do hope you understand none of this is personal. Ah, there it was. Public pity. Somehow worse than rejection. Evelyn looked toward her quietly. The kingdom needs strength, Serafina continued lightly, glancing briefly toward Lucien before returning to Evelyn. And queens carry certain expectations. Quiet laughter followed again. Softer this time. Nervous laughter. Nobody fully trusted the room anymore. Evelyn almost smiled again. Strange how people always called cruelty honesty when they wanted applause for it. She lowered her gaze briefly, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress while carefully steadying her breathing. Trembling looked too much like weakness. Somewhere in the crowd, Amelia stood frozen near the back of the court, worry written plainly across her face. Evelyn caught the smallest shake of her head. Come with me, it seemed to say. Leave before this gets worse. Smart advice. Probably. But something had shifted already. Strange calm settling slowly into place where embarrassment usually lived. Maybe because heartbreak had finally grown tired of apologizing for existing. Lucien finally moved then, descending one step from the throne platform. Just enough movement to make the room notice. That will be enough, he said evenly toward Serafina. Calm voice. King voice. But not warm. Not protective either. Just controlled. Serafina offered a polished smile immediately. Of course, Your Majesty. I simply wished to comfort her. Comfort. Interesting word choice from someone clearly enjoying herself. Evelyn noticed something then. Lucien looked uncomfortable. Not regret exactly. Not yet. But uncertain. Like the script had changed halfway through and nobody bothered giving him new lines. Good, another small part of her thought unexpectedly. Let uncertainty sit with him a while. The room still waited. Everybody waited. Because moments like this always required endings. Somebody crying. Somebody leaving. Somebody losing gracefully enough for the powerful to feel generous afterward. Evelyn understood the role expected of her tonight. Rejected Omega. Quiet disappointment. Future cautionary tale whispered over expensive wine. Poor thing. She almost became queen. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly and looked directly toward Lucien for the first time since the rejection. Properly looked. Silver eyes meeting soft brown ones beneath gold candlelight and impossible silence. Strange. He suddenly looked more tired than powerful. More uncertain than cold. Dangerous thing, sympathy. Dangerous because part of her still cared despite everything. Foolish heart. She folded her hands tighter together. Calm now. Steady. Around her, noble women leaned forward subtly again. Waiting. Waiting for the reaction they deserved. Evelyn inhaled quietly, then exhaled slower. Your Majesty, she said softly, voice calm enough to echo unexpectedly through the enormous hall. Thank you. Confusion moved visibly through the court. Thank you? Even Lucien blinked once. Small. Quick. Genuine surprise finally cracking through perfect control. Evelyn offered the smallest smile again. Gentle. Quiet. Devastatingly polite. For being honest, before I spent years mistaking obligation for affection. Complete silence. Vera kept her eyes lowered as the dining hall swelled with noise around her. Silver goblets clinking beneath the heavy chandeliers while laughter rolled across the long oak tables like thunder she had learned long ago not to fear and not to trust. The Mooncrest estate always smelled different during gatherings. Rich meat roasted over cedar wood. Sweet wine poured too freely. Perfume thick enough to hide cruelty beneath polished smiles. Tonight felt heavier somehow, colder despite the crowded room. Maybe because every conversation circled around one thing. The Alpha King had crossed the northern territories. Maybe because everyone suddenly cared about rank more than kindness. Or maybe because people only grew crueler when power drifted close enough to smell. Vera stood near the edge of the hall beside the serving table, her faded gray dress nearly blending into the stone wall behind her. She was supposed to remain invisible. That had been her aunt's instruction before guests arrived. Stay quiet. Do not embarrass this family. Do not forget what you are. A burden. The word still sat sharp beneath her ribs. Across the room, her cousin Lydia laughed too loudly, surrounded by daughters of neighboring packs draped in velvet gowns trimmed with silver thread. Every movement they made looked rehearsed, elegant in the way people became when they had never worried about hunger or loneliness. Vera reached for another tray of glasses when a sharp voice cut through the room. Careful, little ghost. Laughter followed before she even turned around. Lydia stood near the center table now, one arm resting lazily against a carved chair. Her dark curls shimmered under candlelight. Beside her stood two women Vera recognized from neighboring clans, both smiling with the kind of amusement that only existed when someone else became entertainment. You almost vanished completely, Lydia said sweetly. I nearly forgot we still kept you around. More laughter. Quiet at first. Then louder. Vera swallowed hard and adjusted the tray in her trembling hands. Ignore it. Just ignore it. That was how survival worked here. But Lydia was not finished. She rarely was when people were watching. "Tell me," Lydia continued, tilting her head as though genuinely curious, "if the Alpha King visits, should we lock Vera upstairs?" One of the women laughed into her whine. "Oh, definitely. Imagine what he would think." Another added, "He might assume Mooncrest breeds weak blood." The words landed harder than they should have. Weak blood. Defective. Broken Omega. Vera had heard every version before. Sometimes whispered. Sometimes spoken directly to her face. Tonight they somehow felt sharper. Maybe because hope had quietly betrayed her. Some foolish hidden part of her had wondered if a king known for strength might value kindness over cruelty. It was stupid to hope. Hope made disappointment feel personal. "Maybe we should introduce her," Lydia continued, pretending to think deeply. "Imagine his face when she speaks." Her smile widened. "Actually, no. Better idea. Let us see if she can even manage proper eye contact without trembling." The women laughed again. Around them no one intervened. No one ever did. Wolves notice cruelty the way storms noticed rain. Ordinary. Expected. Even some of the older guests watched with detached amusement, their silence somehow louder than the mockery itself. Vera lowered her gaze further. Her wolf stirred faintly beneath her skin, wounded but awake enough to feel shame curling through her chest. She hated that part most. Not the insults. Not even the humiliation. The way her body still reacted. As though somewhere deep inside she still wanted approval from people who had already decided she did not deserve dignity. "Speak," Lydia said suddenly. "Or has the little Omega forgotten how?" The room quieted just enough. Just enough for waiting eyes to gather. Vera's fingers tightened around the tray until her knuckles ached. Her throat felt dry. Heavy. She could leave. She should leave. But leaving would only feed them more. Another joke. Another whispered story tomorrow over breakfast. Poor Vera ran away crying again. So instead she lifted her chin slightly. Not fully. Just enough to breathe. "I remember," she said softly. Her voice barely carried beyond the nearest table, but somehow the room still heard it. Lydia blinked. Surprised. "Oh." Her smile sharpened. "Then tell us. What exactly does a forgotten Omega dream about?" Vera hesitated. The candles flickered overhead. Somewhere outside, wind brushed against the tall windows. For one strange second she thought of the injured black wolf from the forest. The way he had looked at her without judgment. The strange stillness in his silver eyes. Like he had seen her without asking what rank she belonged to. The memory steadied her more than she expected. "Peace," Vera answered quietly. A few people snorted. Lydia rolled her eyes dramatically. "Peace," she echoed. "That is tragic." Someone nearby muttered, "Small dreams for small people." More laughter spread through the room again. But Vera did not lower her head this time. Her hand still shook. Her chest still hurt. Yet somewhere beneath the humiliation, something small remained standing. Pride maybe. Or stubbornness. The kind that survived because everything else had already been taken. Lydia gave a dismissive wave. "Enough. Go refill the wine before you embarrass yourself further." Vera nodded once because resistance cost energy she no longer had. She turned carefully toward the serving table, forcing slow breaths through lungs that suddenly felt too tight. Behind her, laughter resumed. Conversation swallowed the moment whole as if cruelty were simply another course served with dinner. But near the far end of the hall, unnoticed by nearly everyone, one unfamiliar figure remained silent. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dressed in black travel clothes instead of ceremonial colors. He stood partly hidden near the shadowed entrance beside two men who carried themselves like soldiers. His silver eyes followed the quiet Omega crossing the room with trembling hands. And for reasons he could not explain, the Alpha King found himself remembering exactly how gently those same hands had once touched wounded fur in the dark of the forest. Vera kept her hands steady only because she had spent years learning how to hide trembling. One glass at a time. One breath at a time. The serving table stood near the western wall of the hall where shadows gathered thicker than candlelight, and for a moment she let herself disappear there. The scent of cedar smoke mixed with roasted meat curled through the air while laughter rolled behind her like distant thunder. People had already moved on. They always moved on. Cruelty rarely lingered for those who delivered it. Only for the person forced to carry it home. She poured dark red wine into silver goblets with careful precision, focusing on the small things. The sound of liquid filling glass. The smooth coolness of polished metal beneath her fingertips. The rhythm steadied her heartbeat enough to stop her hands from shaking. Barely. You should stop apologizing for existing. The voice startled her so badly she nearly dropped the bottle. Vera turned quickly. An older kitchen woman stood beside her, wiping flour from her hands onto a faded apron. Martha had worked in Mooncrest Estate longer than anyone Vera could remember. Her hair had gone almost entirely silver, and her expression always carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had witnessed too much and spoken too little. Vera blinked. I was not apologizing. Martha lifted one brow. Child, I have watched you for years. You apologize with your shoulders. Vera looked down instinctively, embarrassed by how accurate that felt. Her shoulders were folded inward again. Small. Protective. Like someone trying not to take up space. She straightened them slowly. Better, Martha murmured before handing her another tray. Now stop hiding back here. Guests still need drinks, and if Lydia notices you vanished, she will only come looking. Vera almost smiled despite herself. Martha had a way of speaking hard truths that somehow hurt less. Thank you, Vera whispered. The older woman shrugged as if kindness were nothing worth noticing. Do not thank me. Just stop letting people convince you they know your worth. The words lingered longer than expected. Worth. Vera did not know what that meant anymore. Somewhere along the way survival had replaced self-respect. It became easier not to ask whether she deserved better. Easier not to imagine another life at all. She lifted the tray and moved carefully through the crowd again. Wolves stood in clusters discussing politics, trade, and rumors about Northern Territory alliances. Everywhere she walked she heard one name spoken over and over. The Alpha King. Some called him ruthless. Others brilliant. Dangerous. Unpredictable. Cold enough to freeze entire negotiations with a single stare. I heard he crossed Blackstone Ridge in one night, one man said near the fire. Impossible, another scoffed. No wolf moves that fast. They say he is not entirely wolf, a woman whispered dramatically. That there is something ancient in his bloodline. Vera lowered her gaze and continued walking. Stories about powerful men had never mattered much to people like her. Kings did not notice forgotten girls carrying wine. Powerful wolves protected bloodlines and status, not quiet omegas with worn dresses and trembling hands. Still, a strange memory pressed quietly against her thoughts. Silver eyes in the forest. The injured black wolf breathing hard beneath moonlight while she wrapped trembling hands around wounded fur. The strange calm she had felt near him. As though loneliness had briefly loosened its grip. She shook the thought away. It had only been an animal. A beautiful one, yes, but still a creature of the woods. Nothing more. Careful there. A deep voice broke through her thoughts. Vera stopped abruptly. Someone had stepped into her path. Tall. Broad shoulders dressed in dark clothes instead of formal silks. She had not noticed him approaching. The tray shifted dangerously in her hands before steadying again. I am sorry, she said quickly, stepping back. I was not paying attention. The man did not move immediately. Something about him felt different from the others. Stillness wrapped around him in a way that made the crowded hall seem quieter somehow. Controlled. Watchful. His dark coat carried traces of pine and cold mountain air instead of perfume or wine. Familiar somehow. Unsettlingly familiar. No harm done, he said at last. His voice sat low and steady, calm in a way she did not hear often among wolves used to proving dominance. Vera finally risked lifting her eyes. And froze. Silver. Bright even beneath flickering candlelight. The same impossible shade she remembered from the forest. Her breath caught painfully in her throat. No, that was impossible. Wolves did not look human. Injured creatures did not stand in crowded halls speaking with composed voices. Yet something deep inside her tightened unexpectedly. Recognition without reason. Fear mixed with something stranger. Safety maybe. Or memory. The man watched her carefully, as though waiting for something. For a long moment neither moved. The noise of the hall faded strangely around them. Then Lydia's sharp voice sliced through the moment from across the room. "Vera," she called loudly enough for half the hall to hear. "Must you stand staring into space all evening?" Several guests turned. Heat rushed instantly into Vera's face. Shame arrived quickly, familiar as breathing. She lowered her eyes at once. "Excuse me," she whispered quietly, clutching the tray tighter. But before she stepped away, the stranger spoke again. Softly. Quiet enough that only she heard. "You should not lower your head for cruelty that belongs to someone else." Vera paused. The words landed somewhere painfully tender inside her chest because nobody had ever spoken to her like that before. Not once. She did not know what to say. So she only nodded once and walked away, though something unfamiliar followed her now. Not hope exactly. Hope felt too dangerous. But maybe curiosity. Maybe the quiet impossible feeling that for the first time in years, someone had actually seen her. Vera carried the empty tray toward the kitchen corridor with her pulse still unsteady, though she could no longer tell whether the shaking came from humiliation or confusion. The stranger's words lingered stubbornly inside her mind. You should not lower your head for cruelty that belongs to someone else. No one had ever defended her quietly before. People sometimes pitied her. Sometimes ignored her. Most often they tolerated her existence like inconvenient weather. But this felt different. The kindness had not sounded forced. It had not sounded performative for an audience. It sounded honest, and somehow that unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. Cruelty made sense. Cruelty had rules. Kindness without reason felt dangerous because it tempted hope back into places she had spent years teaching herself to lock shut. She stepped into the kitchen where warmth wrapped around her instantly. Steam rose from large pots. Bakers moved quickly between wooden counters while cooks barked instructions across the room. The scent of cinnamon and roasted apples drifted through the air, softening the sharp ache still sitting beneath her ribs. Martha stood near the stone oven, kneading dough with practiced hands. She glanced up once. "You look like you saw a ghost." Vera hesitated before setting down the tray. "Someone spoke to me." Martha paused dramatically. Good heavens! In this house? Despite herself, Vera laughed quietly. The sound surprised her. Small. Rusted from disuse. Martha softened immediately at the sound. "There she is," the older woman murmured. "Been a long time since I heard that." Vera looked down quickly, embarrassed by the warmth spreading unexpectedly through her chest. "It was strange," she admitted quietly. "He was." She stopped herself. What exactly had he been? Familiar? Calm? Impossible? Martha narrowed her eyes knowingly. "A man." Vera nearly dropped the towel she had picked up. "No. I mean yes. I do not know." Martha chuckled softly and turned back to her work. "That usually means trouble." Before Vera could answer, a sudden noise cut through the kitchen entrance. Sharp voices. Hurried footsteps. One of the younger servants rushed inside, cheeks flushed pink. "There is an injured dog outside," the girl blurted quickly. "Near the carriage road." Nobody looked up. A cook waved one hand dismissively while stirring soup, then let it wander off. "Probably stray," another muttered. "Do not bring fleas inside." But Vera had already gone still. Injured. Alone. Something old and instinctive tightened painfully inside her chest. Maybe because she understood what it felt like to be unwanted. Maybe because the memory of dark fur beneath moonlight had never fully left her. "Where?" she asked softly. The servant blinked. "Near the east gate. I think one of the stable boys said its leg looks hurt." Martha noticed the shift in Vera immediately. The quiet alertness. The concern she always tried to hide. "You are thinking about going," Martha said flatly. Vera hesitated only half a second. "What if it is suffering?" "It is freezing outside," Martha replied. "And your aunt will have your head if you disappear during dinner." Vera lowered her eyes. She knew that. Knew exactly how tonight would end if Lydia or Aunt Margaret noticed she had stepped away from duties. Another lecture. Another reminder that she existed only because family obligation demanded it. Yet the thought of something frightened and hurting outside sat wrong inside her chest. She remembered the wolf in the forest again. The weight of exhaustion in silver eyes that somehow still trusted her enough not to run. The memory pulled harder than reason. I will only be a few minutes, Vera whispered. Martha sighed the deep sigh of someone losing an argument before it even started. You have a heart too soft for this place. But she wiped her hands quickly and shoved a thick wool shawl toward Vera. At least wear this before you freeze to death, rescuing every sad creature in Mooncrest. Vera smiled faintly and wrapped the shawl tightly around her shoulders. Thank you. Outside, cold air hit her instantly, sharp against flushed skin. The estate grounds stretched wide beneath pale moonlight, frost glittering silver across stone paths. Music from the dining hall softened behind heavy doors until only muffled laughter remained. The world outside felt quieter. Real somehow. Vera followed the road toward the eastern gate, boots crunching softly against gravel. Wind brushed through bare trees overhead, carrying distant scents of cedar and snow. Hello, she called gently after several minutes. Easy now. Nothing answered at first. Then faint movement near the stable fence caught her eye. Curled awkwardly beside stacked firewood sat a large dark shape trembling against the cold. Bigger than she expected. Not a dog exactly. Too broad. Too still. Vera slowed carefully. The animal lifted its head slightly, and her breath caught. Black fur. Silver eyes reflecting moonlight with impossible familiarity. Her heart stumbled painfully against her ribs. No, she whispered softly, stepping closer before she could stop herself. It cannot be. The wolf looked exhausted. One front leg tucked awkwardly beneath its body. A faint sound escaped it, low and tired rather than threatening. Something inside Vera broke open immediately. Without thinking, she crouched carefully several feet away, lowering her voice the same way she had that night in the forest. Hey, she whispered gently. You found me again. And hidden behind the stable shadows where moonlight barely reached, a tall figure stood perfectly still, watching the scene unfold with unreadable silver eyes, saying nothing at all. Torches hissed softly against the evening wind as the great hall of Black Hollow Pack settled into a dangerous kind of silence. Not true silence. Never true silence in a room filled with wolves. It was the kind made of lowered voices, sharpened glances, and the restless shifting of people waiting for something to break. Alara stood near the edge of the long oak table, her fingers curled around the folded linen she had brought from the kitchens. The warmth from the ovens had long faded from her skin, replaced by the cold pressure crawling up her spine. She had only meant to leave quietly after helping one of the younger servants carry water. But now every path toward the door felt impossibly far. Across the hall, laughter rippled like broken glass. Lady Vivian leaned back in her chair, silver bracelets gleaming beneath the candlelight. Her smile curved slowly when she spotted Alara standing alone near the wall. Look who wandered into the wrong room again, she said, loud enough for half the hall to hear. Several heads turned. Some amused. Some curious. Most indifferent. The worst kind. Alara lowered her gaze. The instinct to disappear settled over her like an old coat, familiar and heavy. She knew better than to answer. Wolves like Vivian did not want conversation. They wanted entertainment. Careful, another woman added with a quiet laugh. You might scare her if too many people stare. More chuckles followed. Someone whispered the word broken beneath their breath. Someone else muttered that omegas like her always forgot their place when kindness made them comfortable. Alara swallowed slowly. Her throat felt too tight. Only hours earlier, she had hidden beside the eastern garden, kneeling in dirt and dead leaves while she carefully cleaned blood from the injured black wolf she had found trembling beneath the stone bridge. The memory still lived warm inside her hands. The rough texture of damp fur. The strange stillness in those silver eyes. The impossible moment when the massive creature, despite its pain, had lowered its head against her shoulder as if trusting her. She had not spoken of it. Could not. Not when Black Hollow already saw weakness in every breath she took. Not when kindness itself had become something people mocked. Did no one teach you manners? Vivian continued, standing now. Her polished boots clicked softly against the stone floor as she approached. Or are abandoned omegas simply born without pride? A few people looked uncomfortable. Most looked entertained. Alara could feel every stare pressing against her skin. She kept her voice quiet. I was leaving. No, Vivian said sweetly. You are staying. She stopped close enough that Alara caught the sharp scent of expensive perfume and winter berries. Tell everyone what happened in the garden earlier. Alara froze. Her pulse stumbled once. Hard. I saw you, Vivian said, smiling wider now. Speaking to some filthy wounded animal like it was your friend. Laughter burst around the hall. Poor thing, someone mocked. No wolves want her, so now she befriends strays. Maybe the mutt rejected her too, another voice added. More laughter. Hot embarrassment crawled up Alara's neck, but beneath it sat something older. Exhaustion. The kind that came from surviving humiliation so many times it no longer surprised you. She could feel herself shrinking inward, retreating into silence the way she always had. Because silence was safer. Silence kept wounds shallow. But then a young kitchen servant carrying a tray slipped near the entrance. Cups rattled violently. One nearly shattered. Fear flashed across the girl's face. She could not have been older than 16. Immediately, someone barked sharply at her to be careful. The girl looked close to tears. Without thinking, Alara moved. It is all right, she said softly, stepping forward before the tray could fall. She steadied it with careful hands. You are okay. The girl looked up, startled, breathing hard. I am sorry, she whispered. I did not mean to. You do not have to apologize, Alara said gently. Take a breath. Her voice stayed calm. Steady. The trembling eased from the girl's shoulders little by little. Around them, the laughter quieted for only a moment. Then Vivian sighed dramatically. Of course, she said, folding her arms. The pack's embarrassment saving servants now. Her eyes glittered coldly. Tell me, Alara, do you think helping kitchen girls makes you useful? The room watched. Waiting. Alara stood still beside the frightened servant. Her chest rose slowly. Fell slowly. Something inside her felt tired in a way humiliation alone could not explain. Tired of shrinking. Tired of apologizing for existing. No, she said quietly. The room shifted. Even Vivian blinked. Alara lifted her eyes. Not angry. Not trembling. Simply tired. Honest. I help because no one deserves to feel afraid. Silence settled differently this time. Thicker. Stranger. Several people looked away first. As if embarrassed by something they could not name. Vivian's expression hardened. You really believe kindness matters here? She asked. In a pack ruled by strength? Alara hesitated only briefly. Somewhere deep in memory she could still feel warm fur trembling beneath her hands. Still see silver eyes watching her in impossible silence. Yes, she answered softly. I do. The candles flickered overhead. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across distant mountains. And somewhere beyond the walls of Black Hollow, hidden beneath darkness and pine trees, a wounded black wolf slowly opened silver eyes that had not stopped remembering the scent of the girl who chose compassion when everyone else would have walked away. The silence shattered faster than Alara expected. Vivian's mouth curved into something sharp and humorless as she stepped closer, the polished heel of her boot tapping softly against stone. How touching, she said, voice dripping with sweetness that did not reach her eyes. The forgotten Omega suddenly believes she understands courage. Quiet laughter flickered through the hall again. Nervous this time, uncertain. Something had changed. Alara could feel it in the air. The room no longer looked at her with pure amusement. Curiosity had slipped in, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. Wolves who had ignored her for years now watched as though trying to understand where this strange flicker of quiet resolve had come from. Beside her, the young servant still trembled slightly, clutching the tray with white knuckles. Alara gave her a small nod, encouraging her to step back. The girl hesitated before quietly disappearing toward the kitchens, relief softening her frightened expression. Vivian noticed. Of course she noticed. Her lips tightened. Still pretending to matter, she said softly. You really cannot help yourself, can you? Alara said nothing. She had learned long ago that cruelty often became louder when ignored. But tonight felt different. Her chest still carried the memory of silver eyes watching her beneath moonlight. The memory settled inside her like warmth against winter. Strange. Quiet. Steady. Tell me something, Vivian continued, circling slowly as though inspecting something unpleasant. What exactly do you think happens to weak wolves in this world? A few nearby pack members shifted uncomfortably. No one interrupted. No one ever interrupted people like Vivian. Not when status mattered more than fairness. Do you think kindness feeds people? Vivian asked. Do you think soft hearts protect territory? Her voice sharpened slightly. This pack survives because strong wolves make hard choices. Alara swallowed once. Slowly, the old instinct to shrink returned for only a moment. But beneath it something steadier pushed upward. Tiredness, maybe. Or the quiet understanding that surviving humiliation had already made her stronger than people realized. Strength matters, she said gently. But kindness matters too. Vivian laughed outright now. Kindness? She repeated loudly enough for everyone to hear. Tell me then. Was it kindness that abandoned you? Was it kindness that made your own family leave you in servant quarters like a burden? The words landed hard. Hard enough that several wolves glanced away. Because cruelty always became uglier when it touched truth. Alara's throat tightened painfully. For one dangerous second, shame threatened to swallow her whole. Memories pressed sharp against her ribs. Nights eating alone. Empty silence where belonging should have been. Years spent learning how invisible someone could become while still standing in plain sight. Vivian stepped closer. Too close. You are weak, she said quietly now. Everyone here knows it. Even that pathetic stray mutt you rescued today probably knew it. Something shifted. Small. Invisible. But sharp enough to stop Alara's breathing for one brief second. Outside, thunder rolled louder across the mountains. The wind moved strangely against the tall windows, rattling old glass. Somewhere deep inside her the image returned again. The wounded wolf beneath the bridge. Trembling but proud. Hurt but still refusing to bear weakness. And those impossible silver eyes. Watching her as though she mattered. As though kindness itself had surprised him. Before she could stop herself, Alara lifted her gaze fully to meet Vivian's. He was afraid, she said quietly. The room stilled. Vivian frowned. What? The wolf, Alara said softly. He was hurt. Afraid. Alone. Her voice never rose, but somehow it carried farther now. I could not leave him there. Someone scoffed behind them, but another voice stayed strangely silent. Then another. Because empathy sounded unfamiliar in a room built on pride. Vivian crossed her arms tightly. You are speaking about an animal like it matters. Alara hesitated only briefly. Pain matters, she said. Even when people pretend it does not. A strange quiet spread through the hall again. Heavier this time. Near the back, an older beta lowered his drink slightly. A servant paused mid-step. Even wolves who disliked Alara seemed uncertain where to look. Because kindness had an uncomfortable habit of exposing cruelty for what it was. Vivian's expression darkened. Humiliation flickered beneath her perfect composure. She had expected tears. Silence. Submission. Not resistance wrapped in gentleness. Enough, she snapped suddenly. You forget your place. She turned sharply toward the guard stationed near the doors. Take her back to servant quarters. She clearly needs reminding of boundaries. One guard hesitated. Just briefly. Long enough for discomfort to ripple through the room. Alara lowered her eyes again, exhaustion settling heavily into her bones. Of course, this was how things worked. Compassion was tolerated only until it became inconvenient. She took one slow breath and prepared to leave quietly. But before anyone moved, the massive front doors groaned open. Cold wind rushed through the hall hard enough to extinguish several candles. Conversations died instantly. Every instinct in the room shifted at once. Wolves straightened. Faces paled. A heavy silence dropped over the hall so quickly it felt alive. Bootsteps echoed across stone. Slow. Deliberate. Powerful. No announcement came. None was needed. Because every wolf in Black Hollow knew exactly who carried a presence heavy enough to silence an entire room without speaking a single word. Alara looked down instinctively, pulse stumbling hard against her ribs. But before her eyes lowered completely, she caught only one impossible detail near the doorway. Dark fabric moving against cold wind. Broad shoulders framed in shadow. And silver eyes. Silver eyes she had already seen once before beneath moonlight. The hall forgot how to breathe. That was the first thing Alara noticed. 1 second there had been whispers, shifting feet, the sharp edges of humiliation hanging in the air. The next, silence settled so completely that even the firelight seemed afraid to move. Every wolf stood straighter, shoulders pulled back, heads lowered just enough to signal respect without appearing weak. Power had entered the room, and instinct recognized it before reason could catch up. Alara kept her eyes lowered, pulse uneven beneath her ribs. But memory betrayed her. Silver eyes beneath moonlight. The rough rise and fall of a wounded chest. Rain-soaked black fur trembling beneath her hands. No, could not be. It made no sense. The wolf beneath the bridge had been injured. Vulnerable. Quiet in a way powerful creatures rarely allowed themselves to be. Yet something inside her already knew. Knew before she dared to look up again. Heavy footsteps echoed across the stone floor, measured and calm. Not hurried. Never hurried. Wolves moved aside without being asked. The crowd opened instinctively, parting around him as though space itself understood who belonged at its center. No one spoke his name aloud, but tension carried it anyway. Alpha King Kalen Blackthorn, ruler of the Northern Territories. The wolf whose decisions shaped entire packs. The man whispered about in kitchens and training yards alike. Some called him ruthless. Some called him brilliant. Most simply feared disappointing him. Alara swallowed slowly. She had only seen him from a distance before. A shadow crossing ceremonial grounds. A figure seated too far away to notice servants. But now he stood less than 20 feet away, close enough for details to settle into focus. Tall enough that everyone near him seemed smaller without trying. Dark coat falling sharply against broad shoulders. Black hair touched by stormlight from the open doors behind him. And those eyes. Silver. Impossible silver. Her breath caught painfully. Because she knew them. Knew the exact stillness inside them. The strange intelligence. The wounded exhaustion hidden beneath pride. The room shifted nervously around him. Vivian stepped forward immediately, voice suddenly softer than honey. "Your Majesty," she said with practiced elegance, lowering her head gracefully. What an unexpected honor. Alara almost flinched. The same mouth that had spoken cruelty moments ago now dripped sweetness. Kalen did not answer right away. His gaze moved once across the hall. Calm. Quiet. Observing everything. Wolves lowered their heads further beneath the weight of his silence. It was not loud dominance that unsettled people. It was restraint. The dangerous kind. The kind that never needed to prove itself. Finally his voice came low and steady. What happened here? No anger. No accusation. Somehow worse. Vivian smiled carefully. Nothing concerning, she said quickly. Only a small misunderstanding involving one of the servants. Alara instinctively looked down again. She expected dismissal. Embarrassment. The familiar burn of becoming invisible. But silence stretched longer than expected. Too long. Strange enough that unease crawled slowly through the room. Then came something she did not expect. Footsteps. Slow. Approaching. Closer. Alara's pulse stumbled harder. 1 step. 2. 3. Until shadow fell softly across the stone at her feet. Her hands tightened against the fabric she still held. She should speak. Bow. Apologize for existing the way people expected her to. But exhaustion lived too deeply tonight. Somewhere beyond fear, there came only quiet. Look at me. The voice landed softly. Not harsh. Not commanding. Somehow that made it harder. Alara hesitated before lifting her gaze slowly. The world narrowed dangerously. Silver eyes met hers fully now. Closer than before. Close enough to see faint tiredness hidden beneath control. A scar near his jaw she had not noticed from far away. Rain-dark memories suddenly rushed through her chest. The wolf beneath the bridge had looked at her exactly like this. Watching. Quiet. A strange ache passed briefly through Kalen's expression. Gone so quickly she almost imagined it. His gaze lowered for only a second toward her hands. Hands still faintly scratched from cleaning blood from dark fur hours earlier. Something unreadable flickered across his face. Recognition. Sharp and hidden. Alara's heart skipped painfully. No. Impossible. She must be imagining things. Around them confusion thickened across the hall. Vivian looked uncomfortable now. Uncertain where the moment was going. Your Majesty, she said carefully, trying again. She was disrupting the evening. Speaking out of turn. Kalen did not look away from Alara. Was she? The room grew colder somehow. Vivian swallowed subtly. Only trying to make herself useful, she said with a brittle laugh. You know how omegas can be. Something changed then. Small enough most people missed it. But Alara saw it. The almost invisible tightening near his eyes. The dangerous stillness settling deeper into his shoulders. Yet when he finally spoke, his voice remained calm. Controlled. Interesting. Silence followed. Heavy enough to make breathing feel loud. Then unexpectedly, Kalen looked back at Alara. Not past her. At her. Tell me, he said quietly. Why did you help the wounded wolf? The question landed like thunder inside her chest. Around them confusion rippled instantly. Several wolves exchanged puzzled glances. Vivian frowned. No one understood why their king cared about some injured animal in the woods. But Alara stood completely still. Because suddenly she knew. Knew in the deepest part of herself exactly who had been trembling beneath the bridge while rain fell softly through pine branches. Her throat tightened painfully. Fear should have come first. Panic should have swallowed her whole. Instead, only honesty arrived. Quiet. Fragile. Unplanned. Because he looked lonely, she whispered. The room went still again. But this time it was not fear settling into silence. It was something stranger. Because for one impossible second, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories looked at the forgotten Omega standing before him as though her answer had reached somewhere painfully human inside him.